A man entered, stared at the ceiling, and said, "It's thinner here." The bell above the door gave a flat, reluctant jingle as he stepped inside. It was 2:17 a.m., the kind of hour when the highway emptied itself and the world beyond the gas station became an ocean of black fields and wind. The pumps outside hummed under the canopy lights, bleaching the wet concrete in a pale, humming glow. No cars idled. No engines ticked. Just insects tapping themselves senseless against fluorescent tubes. I was alone. The store smelled of stale coffee and lemon disinfectant. The slushy machine churned thickly in the corner, its motor coughing every few seconds like it had a bad lung. The refrigerators along the back wall vibrated with a low, steady drone that had long ago fused into the back of my skull. He didn't look at me when he came in. He stepped onto the scuffed linoleum and stopped beneath the center aisle. Slowly, deliberately, he tipped his head back and stared at the ceiling. "It's thinner here," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it landed heavily, like something placed with intention. I glanced up automatically. The ceiling was a grid of acoustic tiles. Off-white squares stained the color of nicotine and damp cardboard. The fluorescent fixtures hummed within their plastic casings. One panel near the drink coolers had a brown water halo from last spring's storms. Nothing unusual. "What is?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes traced the seams between the tiles, following the metal grid as if mapping fault lines. "The barrier," he said finally. A faint tick echoed above us. I stiffened, probably the cooling metal from the roof. It had rained earlier. Temperature shifts always made the place talk to itself. The roof would contract, nails would tighten, and you'd get that little restless cracking overhead. "It's just the roof," I said. He shook his head once. "Roofs are thicker." The fluorescent lights flickered, just a brief stutter, but long enough to thin the room into a gray haze. For a fraction of a second, the ceiling looked closer. Not lower exactly, but nearer, as if the space between us and it had compressed. When the light steadied, one tile above the candy aisle sagged slightly. I frowned. I hadn't noticed that before. "Does someone own this place?" he asked. "Yeah. He's not here." "That's good." The temperature dipped. It wasn't dramatic. The heaters near the counter still rattled, still pushed warm air toward my knees. But the warmth felt swallowed halfway up my body, as though something above was drinking it in. A cold draft brushed the back of my neck. Another tick, then a soft, granular drag. I looked up again. The sagging tile had deepened at its center, bowing into a shallow curve. The metal grid trembled faintly, vibrating in tiny shivers that made the fluorescent light hum louder. "Do you hear that?" he asked quietly. It wasn't rain. It wasn't expansion or settling. It sounded like weight shifting across paper. A careful redistribution. Patient testing. "Probably an animal," I said. "Raccoon or something." "There's no attic," he replied. He was right. The building had a flat roof. Insulation sat directly above the panels. There was nowhere for an animal to stand. The drag continued. Slow. Intentional. A fine dust sifted from the seam of the sagging tile, catching the light like drifting ash. My mouth went dry. "What do you mean thinner?" I asked. He lowered his gaze for the first time. His eyes were bloodshot but steady, reflective in a way that made them seem almost filmed over. "It presses," he said. "It finds weak places. Places that flex instead of resist." The fluorescent light flickered again, longer this time. The store dimmed to a sickly green-gray. In the half-light, the ceiling tiles looked softer, less rigid. Their surfaces weren't flat anymore. They rippled faintly, like skin responding to breath. The humming of the refrigerators deepened in pitch. The sagging tile bulged downward another fraction of an inch. And then I saw it. A shape beneath the surface. It wasn't distinct. Not at first. Just a subtle rounding, as if something broad and smooth pressed gently from the other side. The tile's texture, those tiny perforations, stretched and distorted around the pressure point. I stepped back from the counter. "That's not possible," I whispered. He nodded slightly, as though I'd confirmed something. The granular drag resumed, but now it moved. Not randomly. It traveled from one tile to the next, each square dimpling faintly as the unseen weight passed over it. The grid quivered in a chain reaction, a metallic shudder running down the aisle. The store lights flickered in rhythm with the movement. Cold air poured down through the seams. It smelled faintly metallic, damp, not like rainwater or mold, but like old coins pressed between fingers. The shape paused directly above us. The tile over the register bowed dramatically, dipping until it hung inches lower than the others. Its center stretched thin, the surface paling, becoming almost translucent. And I realized something horrifying. It wasn't sagging like soaked cardboard. It was stretching. The edges remained taut within the metal frame while the center pulled downward, elastic and resistant. The texture smoothed as it thinned, the perforations sealing over like pores closing. "It's not a ceiling," the man murmured. The lights dimmed again, but this time they didn't flicker back fully. The store took on a submarine gloom, shadows lengthening, colors draining. The hum of electricity grew louder, vibrating in my teeth. The stretched center of the tile quivered. A faint outline formed beneath it, curved, deliberate, like the impression of a forehead pressing gently against latex. Then another swell beside it, smaller, probing. Finger shapes. They moved slowly, experimentally, indenting the membrane from above. My knees buckled against the counter. "It's been watching," the man said, "through thicker places. But here." The membrane thinned further, the surface shining faintly under fluorescent light. Veins of darker shadow webbed through it, not cracks but something organic. Something alive. A sound came from above. Not scraping anymore. Breathing. Long drawn. Close enough that I felt the exhale ripple the stretched surface. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of me. The pumps outside flickered, their canopy lights stuttering in sympathy. The entire building seemed to tighten, as if bracing. The membrane bulged lower. The outline of a face pressed clearly against it now. Smooth where features should have been, but undeniably structured. A brow ridge. A nose-like ridge flattening the surface. A mouth opening, distorting the material outward. It wasn't pushing to break. It was waiting for the material to give. I understood then. The ceiling hadn't been weakened by water or time. It had been worn thin by observation. Pressed nightly. Studied. Measured. The man stepped back toward the door. "You shouldn't have stayed open so late," he said quietly. The membrane quivered violently. A small tear appeared at its center, no bigger than a coin. From it leaked a darkness deeper than the room's shadows. Not absence of light, but something thicker. Viscous. The tear widened with a wet, fibrous sound. Cold air roared downward, knocking over a rack of chips. The fluorescent tubes burst one by one with sharp pops, plunging the store into strobing half-light. Through the widening rupture I saw an eye. Not human. Too large. Lidless. Its surface gleamed like oil on water, colors sliding across it in slow spectrums. It stared directly at me, unblinking. I couldn't move. The membrane split further, peeling apart like overstrained skin. Pale, jointed shapes pressed through. Too many fingers bending at wrong angles, gripping the edges of the tier and pulling. The man opened the door. Night wind spilled in, carrying the scent of wet asphalt. "It's thin enough now," he said. The thing's face emerged halfway through, its form squeezing with wet elasticity. The edges of the ceiling clung to it like torn tissue. I realized then that the ceiling had never been a barrier. It had been a lid, and lids only hold until pressure becomes greater than resistance. The eye widened as it entered our world fully, adjusting, focusing. It had been watching from the other side for longer than I'd worked here. Longer than the building had stood. Pressing, measuring, learning. Waiting. Now the membrane hung in shreds around it, fluttering like discarded skin. And as its fingers reached toward me, I understood with perfect clarity. It hadn't found a thin place. It had made one. The store's clock skipped ahead, but only for me. It happened at 2:11 a.m. I know that because I was staring at it. The clock above the cigarette rack was one of those cheap plastic ones with a red second hand that jerked forward in tiny, decisive ticks. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, and the refrigerators along the back wall hummed in a steady mechanical chorus. Outside, the parking lot lay empty beneath the canopy lights, the pumps glowing in sterile white silence. The second hand hit 12. Tick, and the digital display on the register flickered. 2:11 became 2:19. 8 minutes gone. The second hand on the wall clock still sat at 12, trembling slightly before moving to the 1. The rhythm hadn't changed. Nothing in the store had reacted. The slush machine kept churning its half-frozen blue syrup. The coffee warmer gurgled quietly. The overhead lights flickered once, lazily, then steadied. I blinked. The clock read 2:12. I looked down at the register. 2:12. My throat tightened. I was certain, utterly certain, it had said 2:19. The air felt subtly thinner, like the store had inhaled and held it. I rubbed my eyes and stepped out from behind the counter. The linoleum floor gave a faint, adhesive squeak beneath my shoes. The aisle shelves stood in perfect stillness, rows of chips and candy undisturbed. The glass doors of the freezers reflected the aisle lights in long, warped bands. Everything was normal, except I couldn't account for 8 minutes. The clock ticked steadily to 2:13. I laughed under my breath. Lack of sleep. I'd picked up an extra shift. My brain was skipping, not the clock. The lights flickered again, longer this time, just enough to make the store dim to a gray-green wash. The hum of the refrigerators deepened in pitch, vibrating faintly in my teeth. Tick. I looked up. 2:27. The second hand hadn't moved. It still hovered between the 3 and the 4. My heart began to pound. The register display read 2:27 as well. But the slush machine hadn't cycled. The coffee hadn't dripped lower. The parking lot outside remained exactly as it had been. No headlights, no passing shadows. It was as if time had leapt forward and then carefully placed everything back in position. Except me. I rushed to the door and pushed it open. The bell above it gave a dull jingle. Cold night air spilled in, sharp and damp. I scanned the empty highway. Nothing but darkness and wind. When I stepped back inside, the door closed behind me with a soft suction thud. The clock read 2:14. My stomach dropped. I walked slowly back to the counter, my movements cautious, deliberate. I picked up a candy bar from the rack and placed it on the counter. Tick. The wrapper was gone from my hand. The candy bar sat half unwrapped on the counter, a bite missing from one corner. I stared at it. My mouth tasted faintly of chocolate. No, I whispered. The clock read 2:38. The second hand jerked forward to the 5. The overhead lights flickered violently this time, plunging the store into near darkness before snapping back on. For a split second, in that dim stutter, I saw something in the freezer glass. A figure standing behind me. I spun around. No one. The aisles were empty. But when I turned back toward the freezer doors, the reflection lagged. For half a heartbeat, it showed me still facing the opposite direction. The hum of the refrigerators grew louder. Tick. 2:15. The numbers on the clock seemed brighter now, sharper against the white face. The red second hand trembled unnaturally between ticks, as if resisting something. I went to the security monitor beneath the counter. For camera feeds glowed on the small screen: register, aisle, entrance, parking lot. All empty, except the timestamp in the corner of each feed read 3:02 a.m. My pulse roared in my ears. On the entrance camera, the door swung open. I watched it happen. The bell moved. The glass door creaked inward. No one entered. But on the recording, a version of me stepped back from the counter as if making space. The footage flickered. The timestamp jumped to 3:17. I was no longer visible in the frame. Instead, something else stood near the register. Tall, indistinct, its outline warped slightly, as if seen through heat shimmer. It leaned forward toward where I should have been. The feed cut to static. I staggered back from the monitor. The clock on the wall ticked normally. 2:16. A pressure built behind my eyes, a sense that something was counting. Not minutes, not seconds, intervals. Every skip felt deliberate, measured. Tick. 2:51. The air shifted colder. My breath fogged faintly. The humming appliances wavered in pitch, stretching thin like audio slowed down. The store felt stretched too. The aisles seemed longer, the ceiling higher. The fluorescent lights flickered in slow motion, their buzz elongating into a low, warped drone. I felt heavy, as though something had been siphoned from me. Not blood, not memory, time. I grabbed my phone from my pocket. 2:17 a.m. No missed notifications. No evidence of the jumps. Only the store clock skipped. Only for me. The security monitor flickered back to life. Now the timestamp read 3:45 a.m. The entrance camera showed the door opening again. This time, the figure was clearer. It wasn't entering. It was stepping out. Its silhouette brushed past the glass, distorting the reflection like oil sliding across water, paused beneath the clock, and tilted its head upward. The clock in the footage read 4:03 a.m. The red second hand on my wall clock froze. Tick. Silence. Every appliance in the store went quiet at once. The refrigerators stopped humming. The slush machine ceased its churn. The fluorescent lights steadied into an unnatural stillness. The clock jumped. 5:12 a.m. I felt something tear, not physically, but internally, like a seam inside my chest pulling apart. My knees buckled. The security monitor showed the register camera now. It displayed the counter from behind where I stood. Except I wasn't there. The space behind the register was empty, and the figure stood in front of it, facing the camera. Its outline wavered, but I could see its head tilt slightly, as if listening. The timestamp read 5:13. The figure leaned closer to the lens, and I understood. The clock wasn't malfunctioning. It wasn't skipping randomly. It was fast-forwarding through pieces of me, siphoning my unused seconds, my unnoticed pauses, the spaces between thoughts. Each jump was time removed from my life and placed somewhere else. Somewhere the figure could move freely. The appliances roared back to life all at once, making me flinch. The clock read 2:18 a.m. I gasped for air. The freezer glass caught my reflection again. This time it didn't lag. It didn't mimic me. It stood still. I turned my head slowly. My reflection didn't. It remained facing forward, eyes fixed on me. Its mouth curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something that resembled anticipation. Tick. 6:02 a.m. The store lights flickered violently. The hum became a shriek. The air thickened, vibrating against my skin. The reflection stepped forward. Not within the glass. Through it. The freezer door did not open. The glass did not shatter. The surface simply rippled outward like disturbed water as the figure emerged into the aisle behind me. I felt it there, cold and patient. The clock's red second hand began spinning wildly, no longer ticking but whirring in a continuous blur. 7:31 a.m. The parking lot outside brightened faintly with false dawn. But the sun hadn't risen. The skip time wasn't lost. It had been accumulating, building mass, building presence. The security monitor now showed two figures behind the register. One was me, frozen mid-breath. The other stood inches away. My hand reached toward the camera. The wall clock stopped entirely. Every appliance fell silent again. In the heavy quiet, I felt breath at the back of my neck. Warm this time, not mine. The store was no longer empty, and whatever had been using my missing minutes had finally gathered enough to step fully into the present. The clock ticked once more, and from somewhere behind me, in my own voice but not my own mouth, something whispered, "Shift's almost over."